have always had a particular reputation in movies and pop culture. Smart, wily, loyal to those who deserve it, but also self-serving and not to be messed with. In 1977, Canadian director Denis Heroux made a horror anthology film in the style of classic British amicus films, comprising of 3 short stories, all morality tales about selfish, vindictive human beings and their disregard for their feline companions, who then suffer the consequences. In the mid-80s, during the height of Stephen King's popularity, a new anthology of his stories were brought to the big screen by Cujo director Lewis Teague. 3 twisted tales of horror and suspense, linked by a mysterious stray cat.
There are millions of them, everywhere, spying on us, watching, waiting. When will they pounce?
Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of nature in horror, and we discuss 2 cat-centric anthology films, The Uncanny and Cat's Eye. Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike Muncer. As ever, I am your host. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre, one subgenre at a time. We are currently in the middle of our 10th season exploring the evolution of nature biting back in horror, and this is part 15. In this week's episode, as that intro suggested, we are going to be looking at 2 cat anthology horror films, The Uncanny from 1977 and Cat's Eye from 1985. Both bonkers films, both worth a watch if you want to check them out before you listen to our spoilerific discussion. So joining me to discuss these 2 films, I've got a longtime friend of the pod. She was last here during our vampire season to discuss what we do in the shadows with me. She is an author, writer, academic, podcaster, of course, co-host of my favourite podcast, The Faculty of Horror, and author of her latest book, Gorgeous Personal Essays on Beauty and Horror. It's Alex West. How are you doing, Alex?
I'm doing well, Mike. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. It feels like it's been a while, right? How's your 2024 been so far?
It's been busy. It's been really good, but really busy. You were part of the launch of my new book, Gorgeous Personal Essays on Beauty and Horror.
Yes.
So I spent a lot of the spring getting that off the ground, and it's been out in the world for a little bit, which has been really scary, but really nice. And then, just buckling down with lots of Faculty of Horror stuff and other writing work, and just, keeping busy and keeping out of trouble.
I love it. I just saw, as we record this, today, it popped up in my feed. You guys have got a new episode on, did I see Jurassic Park?
Yes, Jurassic Park and Island of Lost Souls.
Oh, that's a good double bill.
Yeah, it's a fun one.
Awesome. So we are talking about, in this season of Evolution of Horror, we've been talking about kind of the horrors of nature, the horrors of like the outside world. What are your kind of thoughts generally, Alex, before we get into these films specifically, on kind of these types of films, like whether you call them kind of creature features, animal attack movies, eco-horror movies, those kind of films?
They're so wide-ranging. Like, so many films kind of fall under like this banner, and there's so many different interpretations of them that I think it's really cool that you're doing this series, and it's been really interesting to see which films you're doing and how you're including them, and it just reminded me how vast this subgenre is, and it feels a little daunting, but then when you think about it, it's like we've always kind of had these little upticks of them, and it's always really curious to see when and why and how, which again, this is what this podcast is all about. But yeah, they're not the kind that always scare me. I don't necessarily have a lot of fear in this area, but I always enjoy them because you have to humanize creatures to a certain degree, and whether it's you're using actual animals or puppets or big animatronics or CGI, there's something a little goofy about it, and I always enjoy seeing how that's realized on a big scale.
Do you think that's part of the reason for their kind of enduring popularity? Because like even this year alone, right, we've had like a couple of new spider movies come out. We've had a couple of shark movies. There's like a shark movie set in Paris that's been really popular this year, right? Like these movies seem to be like constantly kind of crowd pleasing movies, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're crowd pleasing, and I've enjoyed a lot of the new ones, especially. I think they're really well done, but they also are so indicative of how our world is falling apart.
Yeah,
and they're very. Oh no, we have a slight guest.
Hey, I mean, it's fitting for this week, right?
Yeah, so my cat Moon has joined us now officially. She's sitting on my notes. So no, but I think if we're talking about the ecological disaster of the world that we're in now, and even other films like where it's buildings are being condemned, and our kind of social fabric is crumbling. Not to always be that guest on this podcast, but things aren't going well. And you know how they say like animals kind of know first, or canary in the coal mine. There is something about the natural world turning against us and how we react to it that I think is a really salient thing for filmmakers to tackle.
Absolutely. I think that's always been a big part of the message of these films, right? Going all the way back. I mean, I guess like you take like the mayor from Jaws, right? Like there's always this idea that like humanity deserves what's coming to them, right? Like that is definitely there on the surface of all of these movies for sure. Are you kind of generally in life, Alex, a very kind of outdoorsy person? Are you kind of good at do you like a hike? Do you like camping? Do you like being out there with the elements?
No, I was a real indoor kid. I say that, and I just got back from a trip to Nova Scotia to my friend's cottage out there. His family has a big cottage out there, so me and some friends went out there, and it was really great. I love doing a cottage trip where I have like indoor plumbing and running water and like things. But camping, nope, never, not going to happen. Will never happen. I am also like covered in mosquito bites from my trip, which I don't enjoy either. I'm not a nature gal, and that will never be me. And most people who know me know that about me and have accepted it, and we all move forward thusly.
What about animals? Have you got a lot of phobias? Are you good with handling things like spiders and that kind of stuff in your house?
I think like insects are a bit like sticky for me. I don't love them. I'm not deathly afraid of them, but I definitely have a bit of a like reaction to them.
Yeah.
And I will say one of the things that scared me the most as a kid, and I've talked about this a lot with our mutual friend and my co-host Andrea Subasati, is one of the films that scared us the most as a kid was Arachnophobia.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And then when we learned as adults that it's a horror comedy, it's like, where's the comedy, brah? I don't understand. But there's a part at the beginning of the film when the scientist is like in the jungle and he like then he goes to sleep and he's in bed and his arms are by his side and the spider bites his hand and that traumatized me so much. Or and then he wakes up in like webbing and that traumatized me so much that for years afterwards I slept with my hands underneath my head thinking that would protect me because they weren't by my side.
Yeah. Do you have a lot of because in the UK we don't, thank God, have any spiders or anything that can kill us. But do you have a lot of animals that can kill you in Canada? You have bears, right? You guys love bears.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, we got bears. Coyotes are really big in urban centers now. I actually saw a coyote in my neighborhood last year.
No way! Oh my God!
And we're like I'm in the middle of I'm just in the west end of Toronto, but we coyotes and there are signs being like watch out for coyotes.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I think the other thing I'm a little paranoid about in nature is ticks.
Oh, yeah.
I really don't want Lyme disease.
Yeah. Yeah.
I saw the Kathleen Hanna documentary. Doesn't look fun.
Absolutely not. Anything that can, kind of dig its way inside you. No, thank you.
I didn't even like when you gestured that. I say,
No, thank you very much. I'm worse with insects and smaller things that you can't see and you don't know what they're up to, not into it. But we are here to talk about cats, Alex. And now... You said to me before we started recording this, you were like, you'd have been offended had I not got you as a guest for this particular double bill, right? Tell us a little bit about your relationships with cats, Alex.
I mean, I guess this is the start of a 3-hour monologue. Well, I'll start at the present. I have 2 cats. I have Moon, my tuxedo cat, who is here. I know this is an audio podcast, but Mike should see her.
I really appreciate it, though. Moon is so adorable. I love her little white feet.
We call them Moon Boots.
Yes.
I got Moon as a tuxedo, and then I have Church, who's named after the cat and pet cemetery, and she is a brown tabby.
Church always looks quite angry whenever you post photos.
She looks so
always looks really pissed
grumpy,
off.
but she is the sweetest cat in the whole world, and she loves meeting new people. I don't have a lot of people coming over to my place, but she loves to meet new people, and Moon is very sweet too. So I have like a very deep connection with both of them, but really like it goes back to my family, particularly on my mom's side. We're always cat people. Like there are always cats around. And then I was living with some people in my mid-20s. One of them had a cat who I loved very much. And then when I moved out, I was like, oh, I miss that energy, and I could kind of start to afford to think about having cats on my own, and I did that. And so there is something that feels very like I love all animals, like dogs, rabbits, all of like I love an animal. Always very excited to see an animal, interact with them. But there is something about cats where I feel like I don't know. It's like I feel something deeply connected to them on a much deeper level than a dog or anything else. And I feel like we actually kind of, I don't know, they get me, I get them. There's something there that feels very intangible, but is so real that I really love. So that's kind of my history with cats.
They are like really interesting, I think, and I think human beings' relationship to cats are really interesting because people are either very much into cats or a lot of people are very much not, right? Like some people are really kind of like almost unnerved or something by cats, which is really interesting, right? Like I think there's always been that kind of interesting dichotomy, and there's always that kind of thing about are you a dog person or you're a cat person, and you kind of assume a different type of personality almost depending on which one you prefer. I think all of that stuff's kind of really interesting about it, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, look at like the news cycle that we're in right now, certainly in North America, where you've got, you know, the Republican vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, talking about, you know, it was a comment that he made years ago about like childless cat ladies taking over and being unhappy. And that's, you know, the plight of the Democratic Party. And it's like, it's all resurfaced again, you know, the crazy cat lady. All of this is always kind of at play, and there's always been so much stigma around cats and having a cat and being a cat owner that I think there is something that makes those of us who love them a little, like, maybe not punchy, but like elbows out about it.
Yeah, that is so interesting, isn't it? And is there something like specifically kind of gendered about that too, right? Like you said, it's so often...
Oh, there sure is, Mike.
It's so often like it's cat women, it's cat ladies, right? Like where did that stereotype or cliche kind of even come from? Like that's a weird thing too, right?
Yeah. And I will say, I know a lot of guys who have cats who are like, it's so, in my lived experience, it's not gendered. However, history tells us otherwise. And a lot of that stems from the good old medieval era, during the rise of Christianity, and as Christianity became the predominant religion across Europe, and, you know, it was bloody, it was war, it was, you know, the fucking nightmare, there became a real stigma around people who didn't conform to the Christian mission, which is, you know, to partner up, to have kids, and to just kind of spawn more Christians for the next generation, and to keep that going and instill those traditions in them. And as we now know, and hopefully most of us accept, a lot of people can't have kids, don't want kids, are unable to have kids for a variety of reasons, which are completely private and completely valid. But back in the medieval era, during this period, you know, if you were a single woman living on the outskirts of society, you were seen as a pariah. But at this point, like, the bubonic plague was beginning to rage across Europe. And what these women tended to realize was that if you kept a clean home that was free of vermin, you tended not to get the plague as much. And what are two things that keep a clean home and keep it free of vermin? Well, you've got a broom, and then you've got a cat. And so when we think of the iconography of the witch, that's where so much of this stems from, this kind of othering of, if you are a cat lover, you are somehow against society, when really what they mean is you are against a heteronormative Christian patriarchal society. And you know what, Mike? I know heteronormative couples who have kids and cats. So
crazy. It's a crazy world.
Crazy.
Out there, you know? That is fascinating, though. I hadn't thought about that, especially with the broom as well. That's so interesting because, of course, yes, that was another next thing I was going to ask you. Like, obviously, this idea of cats and witches, right? There's this connection too, right? And that kind of, it's like a familiar, right, to a witch is so often a cat.
Yes.
But yeah, tell me a little bit about, because you've researched this, you've talked in lectures about this, right? About cats.
Yeah.
In horror and in cinema. Like, what are your thoughts on that and the ways in which cats have been portrayed in cinema?
You know, it's been such an interesting thing, and I did a lecture on the topic for the Miskatonic Institute. So I got to do it in New York, Toronto, and in Salem, Massachusetts, which was really good, and people were really invested in it because there's a lot of cat lovers, there's a lot of horror lovers, and often there's a lot of overlap. So it was a really fantastic experience to get to do this lecture multiple times and talk to different people about their experiences and what they love or don't love. And so that was really cool. But, you know, I think within the horror genre, it's, you know, cats have been so closely associated with the iconography stemming from that idea of familiar, which goes back to, you know, the witch hunters in Europe. And, you know, so we had like the first naming of these imps and these familiars. And there were other small animals, including like dogs and rabbits and rats and things like that. But the cats kind of took. And one of the reasons why cats have kind of had this strange evolution through the genre is because, you know, when the witches were burned, if you're talking about Central Europe, their cats were often burned alongside of them and tortured, and they were like run out of town. But the reason why cats still exist today is because of their incredible ability to procreate. Like, that's why it's like spay and neuter your pets, because these cats will just like endless, they can have multiple litters in 1 year. So in many ways that's allowed them to survive, but that's also now kind of made them an invasive species in other ways. So the proliferation of cats and their incredible sensitivity to sight and sound and smell, it's like if you live with a cat, if you know a cat, it's like they always kind of see something or are reacting to something that we can't. So that's always given people a sense of like, ooh, are they in touch with something on the other side? And then, of course, the other big thing, especially pre-modern medicine, was allergies. People have really terrible allergies to cats. And before they knew what that was, people just knew they felt lousy around cats. And so it was like, well, I think this thing is evil because I feel rotten when I'm near them.
That is so interesting, isn't it? And yeah, and I like the way that like, cats are often portrayed in, let's say, in fiction, even in children's fiction compared to, you know, horror. Mm-hmm. Dogs will be friendly, loyal, excitable. Cats will be a little bit more like, fuck you, a bit more conniving, a bit more intelligent, right? And often, like, you know, have the upper hand. They're plotting, they're scheming, that kind of thing. Again, like, there is this real kind of reputation that they have in storytelling, right?
Yeah, there's like always a suspicion about their true nature.
Yeah.
And like, we're never quite sure what they're up to. And they're used in so many different ways. And even, you know, if you look at history, like so many British kings were referred to as lions or lion-hearted. And, you know, then, you know, you've got like the fat cats of Wall Street. And, you know, so they've been used in, you know, really celebratory and also pejorative ways throughout our culture. And I think that's why with the rise of the internet, with the rise of social media, we can kind of connect more about these cats, which have been so, you know, quote unquote, elusive to capture in any meaningful way. And now it's like you go on Instagram, you go on TikTok, you go or YouTube, and it's like you can watch all of the cat videos in the world and you get to experience these weird, quirky little personalities that are often just very sweet. And they just don't, you know, follow like, you know, tricks and you can train them, but you're also like, why? And they're also like don't fucking try to train me.
Yeah, I know.
You know,
yeah,
they're their own thing. There's like a beautiful independence to them that, they're very loyal. Mine are certainly very loyal and very loving. And I would never want to take anything out of their personality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. And I think you're so right about social media. You know, like for all of the bad stuff in the world that social media has brought us, animal content is one of the best things about the internet, right? Like animal content and specifically cats. I think you're right. Like I'm sure probably more than any other household pet, like cats make up the bulk of great internet content.
Yeah,
you know,
they sure do, and it's wonderful.
It really is. It really is. Tell us a little bit about do you have any particular favorites in terms of horror movies that particularly focus in on cats? Because there's not like a huge amount, are there? Like not in comparison to some of the most iconic kind of animal attack movies out there, whether it's kind of like Cujo or Jaws or all the alligator movies and snake movies out there. I feel like there've been a few less cat movies, but do you have any particular kind of favorites?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite kind of standout is probably House.
Oh, yeah.
From 1977, where you've got the Japanese film, of course, and Japan has such a rich history with cats, and it is so intricate and fascinating. That they've often delved and utilized cats in a lot of their horror films. So there's a whole lineage of them, and I highly recommend checking out all of them. Yeah. But House is kind of my favorite. I mean, Blanche, Snowball, whatever dubbing or translation you're getting, I mean, iconic. I also am a really big fan of a new movie that's just about to come out, I think on wide release or certainly for VOD, called Booger.
Ooh, okay. I've not seen this.
Yeah, it's about a girl who loses her best friend and her cat and goes on kind of a journey of trying to find her cat and maybe herself, but then also maybe starts becoming a cat herself. And it's a really great body horror movie. So I think I saw it was getting a larger release this fall. So definitely keep an eye out for Booger. It was very fun, low budget New York feature debut that I was really impressed with.
Love that. Incredible. Do you think that cats can be kind of scary, threatening monsters in horror movies in the way that, for example, a shark can be or an alligator can be?
I think they can be. It's tricky though, because they got they're so cute. For lack of a better word, but I always think even that shot from the 2019 Pet Sematary remake where they have church in the middle of the road looking very menacing. I was like, oh, that's a creepy shot. So I think you can. I think they just haven't managed it.
As a kid, I was freaked out by Mary Lambert's Pet Sematary when the cat jumps into the bath with when the main guy is in there and it's got the kind of glowing yellow eyes.
Yes,
terrified me. Now I watch it as an adult, I do find that cat still quite adorable, even when it's like a zombie cat. But it is there's something quite menacing there. Pet Sematary is a great example, actually, of a kind of creepy cat movie. Yeah, so good. Okay, well, we've got some absolute gems to discuss here.
Bangers.
I mean, come on, bangers. Two sort of cat or cat adjacent anthology horror movies, right? Such weird, bizarre movies, both of them. Let's start by talking about The Uncanny from 1977.
There is no shortage of monsters to haunt our dreams. Like the creature from the Black Lagoon, deadly aliens from outer space, giant ants, man-eating sharks, and bloodthirsty grizzly bears. But the most fiendish, the most fascinating, the most terrifying creature of all may be waiting for you round the next corner. Or living right in your own home.
Alex, just give us a little brief plot synopsis, first of all. Tell us what The Uncanny is all about.
Well, The Uncanny is basically about a writer named Wilbur who goes to see his publisher, Frank, one night. And Wilbur's super nervous, and he's really scared, and he's really paranoid because he has written the treatise about why cats are evil and that they are all out to get us and that they are all in a nefarious plot to take down humanity. And the publisher doesn't believe him. He's got a cat of his own. They're sitting by the fireplace. He's like, look at this cat. This cat is great. And Wilbur is determined to get the word out about these cats because the cats are onto him. He can see them outside the window. They're following him. And so he proceeds to tell Frank 3 stories from the book that are meant to show how evil cats are. The first one is about an old woman who leaves all of her money to her cats, and her kind of misguided maid and evil nephew try to get the money from the cats through all of this duplicity, let's say. The second story is all about a girl who loses her parents in a car wreck, and she goes to stay with her family, like this distant family, and she brings her cat with her. The cat is not welcome, and the family are also just a bunch of fucking cunts to her. So she uses witchcraft and gets back at them. And then the final story that Wilbur tells is about this horror movie actor who has killed his wife and her kittens and is trying to like start up a new affair with this new girl, and then the cats come after him. And so Wilbur is then satisfied that he has gotten it across to his publisher. They're evil. We need to get this book out. Everyone needs to know. And Frank, the publisher, of course, is in league with the cats, or becomes entranced, and then throws the manuscript on the fire as Wilbur is attacked by a gang of adorable cats and some cat puppets.
So adorable, all of these cats.
So cute.
What do you think of this film, first of all, Alex? What did you make of it?
I mean, I've seen this one a number of times now because cats and horror, right up my street. And every time I watch it, I always forget how truly weird it is. And I find it to be a fascinating movie because, like, we can talk about Peter Cushing more in a second, but he sells the shit out of this performance. He is so scared all of the time. And he's like, these cats are evil. And then you watch these 3 stories and you're like, I don't think the cats are evil.
No. These people all have it coming, right? I mean, that is the moral of each of these stories, is that, like you said, these people are a bunch of cunts in every single story, and they get what's coming to them, right? And
you're like, go, cats, go, hurt them more. So it kind of makes me wonder, like, about the rest of the book, or like who Wilbur's getting his sourcing from. I mean, so it's a bit of a confused movie tonally in that regard. But I do very much enjoy it. And it's something I have a lot of fun with that is a bit all over the place and a bit messy. But I mean, why not?
Yeah, I really enjoyed watching this. And, especially I've watched a lot of 70s animal attack movies these last few weeks, and they all follow the exact same formula over and over again. And it was really fun to watch something that is just totally fucking bonkers and did its own thing. It's quite short, and it's an anthology movie, so it just zips along, and I was this was quite good for my brain. I quite enjoyed it, and it's got all of these famous actors in it. I'm like, what are all these people? What's Peter Cushing doing here? What's Donald Pleasance doing here? Right? It's madness, but I kind of embraced the madness. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, as long as you embrace the madness, then it's a really fun watch. If you try to make any true sense out of it, it's not for you.
Based on what we were just discussing, and the research you've done on kind of cats in movies, how does this kind of fit the typical kind of portrayal of cats in kind of horror and genre movies, would you say, or does this do anything kind of different?
It's an interesting one. It kind of does a bit of both. It toes the line, but it also subverts it, because in many ways you've got Wilbur kind of espousing this patriarchal nightmare about cats, and that they are nefarious and up to no good, and maybe we've never known their true intentions, and it's because they're evil. And then you watch the stories and you're like, actually, these cats are protecting women, across all of them. Maybe the most shocking scene is in the first one, maybe, where the cats are eating their, mistress, and people will always lob that at you, and I'm like, I say, go to town, girls.
Absolutely. I'm dead. Go for it.
Eat my eyeballs. I'm not going to eat them. And, and so it's just interesting that it's, the kind of dichotomy of, this very male-based heteronormative anxiety about cats. And then you've got these 3 stories that are like, these women had no other advocates except these cats.
Yeah.
And the cats were like, let's go. And I think it's a great look at this, I think maybe unintentional duality, because again, it's 1977, maybe it's progressive, but I have my doubts.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? Because it is there in all of the stories, like you say. So whether intentional or not, there's definitely something there. Like, all of these movies are basically about like men trying to fuck over women, right? And then getting fucked over by the cats. So yeah, that is so true. That is really interesting. And I do think that the cats, again, like you said, I mean, yes, they viciously kill a lot of people in this movie, but there is also there's that loyalty, I suppose, like you mentioned, that is so often kind of associated with cats, right? There is this like, don't fuck with us, and then we won't fuck with you kind of an attitude, right? Yeah, which
and
is
like
great.
all of the cats just like circling like Peter Cushing throughout the film. It's like, just don't tell our secrets, bro. Like, what's the problem?
Yeah. The other thing that I kind of like forgot about until I was watching it, and I thought, oh, this is another thing that's kind of fitting for me and you talking about it, is that it's kind of British/Canadian, right, as well? Like, this is weird.
Yeah.
It's kind of jumping back and forth between Canada and the UK. Like, again, like very broadly speaking, do you feel a lot of kind of Canadian horror sensibilities at all in this movie, or not? What would you say?
I mean, it's interesting because it's coming out in 1977. So we're kind of in the tax shelter period, like post-Black Christmas, on the cusp of things like My Bloody Valentine. And so this isn't that. This isn't a teen slasher or something like that, or something similar to a Cronenberg film. This feels very austere. This to me feels quite British. Especially with the inclusion of Cushing and Pleasance. So you don't necessarily have the Canadiana, except you do feel the echoes of an older generation of Canada, that it was very like, we are the Commonwealth and we're happy about it. We're just, wow, we saw Montreal named on screen. That's big for us.
Yeah.
It's like, we're just happy to be mentioned half the time. But I think like the Britishness and the kind of, it's not quite backwards looking, but it's not exactly progressive element feels like a very kind of staid, like almost Hammer-esque kind of quality to it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. It feels much more British, right?
Yeah.
Than it does a kind of 70s Canadian film in that way. And, there are definite, like you say, I think through the 1960s, the big kind of horror exports from the UK were Hammer Studios films. In the 70s, we started experimenting with slightly different movies, folk horror, things like The Wicker Man, of course. But also, all through the 60s and 70s, there was this great tradition of kind of amicus anthology movies, right? And I think it's very easy to mistake the uncanny for an amicus film. It feels very amicus, I think, right? And it was actually distributed by the Rank organisation, which is a British distributor. The producer, Milton Subotsky, was also an amicus producer, so it very much has that kind of amicus DNA. And I think you're right, it feels like it's kind of looking back. It feels like while America in the late 60s and 70s, the era of like Night of the Living Dead and Rosemary's Baby and horror films being very modern and cosmopolitan, British horror was still very much looking back to that kind of gothic tradition,
Yeah, and like even down to the fact that this came out like a year before Halloween, where you have Donald Pleasance as Dr. Loomis. Yeah. And in here, he's like this rakish fuckboy actor, as opposed to like this like old doctor who like is gonna maybe save the day. And it's like, wow, there's a lot can change in a year.
I know. I had no idea that I was going to be discussing so much Donald Pleasance as well, because he was in Wake in Fright, the brilliant Australian movie that we did a few weeks ago as well. Like,
great one.
Donald Pleasance, the amount of movies that he just pops up in, unbelievable, right? So good.
Don't get married, then you don't have to pay alimony.
Exactly, right? Exactly. So yeah, how do you find, like, are you a fan of the kind of anthology horror? I'm always quite a fan. I always feel like I can kind of sink quite easily and happily into an anthology movie. How do you find kind of the subgenre of anthology horror?
I go back and forth. Like, my favorite is probably Tales from the Dark Side, the movie. But that I just grew up watching it, so like maybe that one just imprinted on me. I have a lot of fun with the Uncanny. I have less fun with the next film we're going to talk about. But it's they're hit or miss for me. I love the idea of a series of like short stories like turn into films, and then it all kind of paces along really nicely. But man, when they drag, they really drag. And then I find I get into my head of trying to count how many, like, oh, okay, we're down 2 stories. There's 1 left. Surely I can finish this, you know?
Yeah. I think hit or miss is right. And often they're hit and miss, right? I think that's the thing about an anthology horror film, is that sometimes it's hard to almost judge it on a whole film, because you'll get some incredible segments and you'll get some terrible segments, particularly like a lot of the modern ones, like I'm thinking of like the VHS films or the ABCs of Death or whatever, where you've basically got like a whole group of very different filmmakers with very different sensibilities all crammed into one movie. And it's like there could be a couple of really good segments in there, and then there could be some absolute shit at the same time, you know?
I mean, tonally, it's hard to manage that. And I think within the 2 films we've got today, they were directed by, you know, they each had one director, which I think really helps.
Yeah, for sure. How do you, and this is another big kind of hurdle, I think, when it comes to kind of animal attack movies, particularly of this time, is how do you pull off the animals convincingly without being kind of cruel to the animals too, right, on screen? And often they do, and you've mentioned in your synopsis, like you get a mix of kind of like real animals with kind of puppets and that kind of thing. How do you find it, the performances, I guess is the word, of the cats on screen here?
I mean, you know, we've kind of discussed how cats are not untrainable, but that's not your first instinct with them. So it's tricky because you often have to have multiple cats that look the same or are the same breed. That's one of the reasons why you'll see more pure breeds in films, like representative of cats, because then you can get a whole bunch of them and just swap them out as you need. So I find the performances, like the cat performances, to be quite interesting because they just look so sweet. And as like you get more into like, especially the Peter Cushing story, like there's a lot of strays and, you know, cats of all different sorts. So they're not necessarily the menacing kind of cat. It's like they all just look like, I want to take that one home. So I think they did an excellent job. They didn't scare me, but I thought they were all wonderful.
I think the most effective parts in terms of the horror are when they're all like en masse jumping on people, right?
Sure.
Like the moment in that, we'll go through the stories in a minute, but the moment in the first story when the woman is kind of just jumped on by hundreds of them, cute as they look, I'm like, yeah, fair enough. Like, fair play. They probably, if they really wanted to, they probably could tear you apart between all of them, you know? And I like that. I guess that's the thing about the kind of smaller creatures, is that you need more of them. You need more quantity.
Yeah, you need more of them. But also, Mike, it's become very clear that you've never had a cat actively wake you up first thing in the morning for their breakfast.
I have not. I have
be
not.
Like, get up, bitch.
Yeah.
That's why I'm like, oh, welcome to my morning routine, lady.
Oh my god, do they jump on you? Do they wake you up?
Sometimes, Moon in particular.
Oh my god, that would scare the shit out of me, I think.
She's like crashed on my chest a number of times, so it's like you just feel like you're having a heart attack.
Well, there's this other kind of really dark thing about cats, isn't there, that I know a lot of people that get really kind of nervous and anxious about, is that they can jump on children, they can jump on babies, they can suffocate them, and there's always that kind of like fear, isn't there, around like, oh, keep cats away from babies and that kind of stuff as well. That's like another quote unquote danger of cats. It's really interesting.
Yeah, again, this whole anxiety about like cats is like this creature that will dismantle like the family unit is fascinating to me. And I'm sure like if you had a baby, like I have friends who have babies, and you want to be really careful around them at all times.
Of course.
And you have to take a lot of precautions, and we all do that. But it's like, but watch out for the cats. I find that particularly interesting.
Yeah, never mind the huge dogs, like that could probably actually eat them, right?
Yeah, you know? No. Watch out for those soul-stealing cats.
Breath stealing. Yeah. Hello, everybody. Just taking a moment momentarily to thank this week's sponsor. That's $20 Patreon subscriber, Drew Mackey. Drew sent me a lovely message, which I'm going to read now. He says, "Hi, Mike. Big fan. I love how the evolution of horror teaches us how effectively horror can critique society. I'm actually working on something that parallels this effort on my own podcast, Gayest Episode Ever, which looks at LGBTQ episodes of old TV sitcoms. That connection might seem like a stretch I'm making to trick listeners into giving my thing a go, and maybe it is, but sitcoms and horror movies, especially slashers, have a lot in common. They're both considered lower culture by those not in the know, they both reached maximum levels of popularity in the 80s, and they're both about criticising the world that produced them, if in sometimes subtle ways. We even have a Patreon series, Weirdest Episode Ever, about when sitcoms take on genre stories like the fact of life slasher whodunit, and because we love Britcoms, we're even doing a Keeping Up Appearances episode this fall. If you like discussions about an art form a lot of people undervalue, you might like Gayest Episode Ever." Please keep up the good work. I look forward to every new episode. Incredible. Drew, thank you so much for that message. And this sounds so much like my jam. I mean, I agree with you. I think there are parallels. There are lots of parallels between comedy and horror generally. And I love this idea of the sitcom being considered almost one of the lowest forms of comedy, right? And yet also one of the most commercially popular. So I really am excited to dive into this podcast. It sounds really interesting. If you're going to keep doing British sitcoms, I'd love to hear a bit of discussion on Blackadder, maybe Bottom. You know, I've got lots of suggestions for you, Drew. But anyway, that sounds really, really fun. So if anyone is interested in listening to that podcast, check out Drew's podcast, Gayest Episode Ever, which you can find wherever you get your podcasts. One more time, a huge thank you to this week's sponsor, $20 Patreon subscriber, Drew Mackey. And don't forget, if you want to become an official Evolution of Horror sponsor, where you can send me a message for me to read out, you can plug your own work, your own podcast, blog, whatever it might be, then just subscribe to our Patreon channel at the $20 per month level. That will also get you access to our entire back catalogue of, I think at this point, 300 bonus episodes, and you'll continue receiving new episodes every single week, even while this podcast is on a hiatus. Just head to patreon.com/evolution of horror. That's patreon.com/evolution of horror. Let's talk a little bit about each of these stories one by one, because again, like you've mentioned, it's wild. They're sort of tonally all over the place one by one. How do you find the kind of wraparound story with Peter Cushing? Because again, they plaster Peter Cushing's name all over the poster, all over the marketing for this film. He's in it for all of about 6 or 7 minutes, probably, right? How do you find him in this?
I think he's great. Every time I see Peter Cushing in something, he just classes it up so much, and I've never seen him phone anything in. So I'm always I think he's wonderful in this film. And it's so as a writer myself, I mean, I can't imagine going to my publisher's house in the middle of the night to be like, I have to warn you about this manuscript and stuff like that. So I find it just kind of hilariously janky from a professional perspective. Yeah. But who knows? Maybe that will be me one day. And, so I think and also a publisher having a home and with a fireplace. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I've just worked with too many small publishers, but that's not my knowledge or experience of them. But I think he effectively sells it. And even at the end, his death scene, which is so silly, but he sells it. He genuinely seems terrified of those French Canadian cats.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. He nailed the tone of this film, right? Which is that he's taking it very, very seriously, no matter how ridiculous it is. And that kind of makes it even more kind of fun and ridiculous, particularly in those kind of moments.
Yes.
Yeah, so good. So good. And what's exactly is going on at the end of that film? Is it that, Frank is kind of being brainwashed by the cats? They're kind of, controlling him with their little cat brains. Is that what's going on there?
Yeah. Yeah, it's which... I mean, who hasn't?
Sure.
I also was wondering,
yeah.
because it's in more recent years, this idea of toxoplasmosis has become really prevalent in talking about cats. It's like this idea that these cats have a disease, and if a human gets it, then you just become obsessed with cats. And it's this narrative that has become pretty popularized in some circles. And like, I've looked into it. It's not real. Like, toxoplasmosis is a serious condition that cats can have and need to be treated for. But it's not something that humans regularly catch. It's not something that we should be scared of. If anything, just, keep your cats indoors to prolong their lives, and you won't get toxoplasmosis, and that's not a thing, and everyone stop it. So it feels like this thing of like, cats are always controlling us, and if you like cats, it's like evil. It's so bizarre to me. And it's like, it's being pushed in like all of these modern narratives, like not just the uncanny, but like literature about it. It's so funny. But the amount of times like my cat can just look at me and it's like, oh, you need food, you need a treat, oh, I should go play with you more. I'm like, yes, this is all great.
Yeah.
Throw out that manuscript. I'm like, all right
then, fine. Exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah. I like that. I think, the majority of these stories are kind of like overtly supernatural, I suppose. But I kind of like the ones that are slightly more ambiguous. Like, I think this first story about this kind of like wealthy old woman and her will and her cats, like, I think is my favorite of the three. And I like that there's no kind of real explanation other than these cats are just being very loyal to their owner, right? Yep. I suppose. Like, yeah, what do you think of this kind of first story, this first proper story?
It's so funny because I finally got around to making my own will a few years ago, and it's mainly to ensure that if something happens to me suddenly, my cats like will be cared for by people who I have vetted, and like they have money set aside for them. Not a lot, but like just for their care. And like, that's what I care about when I die. Yeah. So that I'm like, I just relate to this. This is like the Alex West story in a movie.
Yeah.
One day I'll have a maid and I got to watch out for her. But it's this anxiety about women who, have money, have wealth, but have not contributed to the, mission of having children, have not procreated, have not done everything the standard way for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. Again, this is like J.D. Vance's waking nightmare about women. Yes. This is what we are and what we do, and we hoard our wealth and we don't do anything, and we are therefore meaningless and nothing. And so I find it quite interesting that this older wealthy lady is just like, my family has failed me. I don't like, you seem kind of dodgy, maid, and the cats get it, and we'll figure out how to deal with it from there.
I love her. I think she's amazing. And I love that also, like, in the will, she really kind of like digs it into her nephew, who she hates so much, right? And she takes like such glee in like not leaving him anything. And I think she is this kind of, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you're right, like she's this kind of stereotypical, almost like crone type figure, but actually also this nephew of Michael and Janet the maid, those two are kind of also pretty awful human beings, right, as well. And again, like, you kind of end up more on the side of this kind of wealthy old cat lady, don't you, I think, Yeah.
No, and it's something that we often feel like we have to leave our lineage, and when your lineage or your spawn or your blood relatives or the people close to you aren't great, like, what do you do?
Yeah.
And I think this film kind of takes that anxiety and it tries to, it makes it horror through multiple of ways, but again, like the eating of the body and, the kind of, strange happenings around her death and after are very emblematic of some of that.
Love it. And yeah, I did enjoyed the cat attack sequences in that particular first story. I think that's some of the best stuff in the film in terms of like the horror as well. It's good stuff.
Where they're just like dropping from the stairs.
Yeah.
It's like,
and awesome. The little I mean, again, like, it's adorable, but like the close-ups on the cats' faces as they're like staring at Janet. And it's like, I know they're supposed to be looking really sinister and evil, but they just look adorable.
Yeah, it's so sweet. And I'm like, I want my girls, I want Moon and Church to behave that way when I die. And that's what I expect of them.
Yes, yeah. Remind me not to come and, I don't know.
No. Let the first wave go through and then you can come in to pick it over.
Exactly that. The second story, this weird one where you've got this little girl staying with these family members who's kind of dabbling in witchcraft and all of that. Like, mental. This second story is mental.
It is wild because the most horrifying aspect of it is how mean that other little girl is to the orphan. Like, she's horrible.
Awful. Yeah. It's these are really kind of like the most kind of two-dimensionally evil characters, this family that this poor little girl stays with, right?
It's just like she's such a bully constantly.
Yeah.
And it's like this girl lost her parents and like really just wants to hang out with her cat and doesn't want anything to do with these people and is just like, I need to just get out of this situation. And but I do love it because it's like, fair warning, but don't cross her and she'll turn her into a mouse. And I'm like, yeah, get her.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be a kind of witchy episode when you're dealing with cats, right? And this middle story is very much the witchy story. Like you say, her mother, her dead mother, kind of left her all of this kind of magic paraphernalia, right? This little girl. And so she casts a spell to kind of protect herself and her cat and ends up turning her bully cousin into a mouse, which again feels very kind of Roald Dahl's The Witches, doesn't it?
And again, like the orphan girl isn't leading with, I'm a witch, I'm weird, I'm all of that. She's just trying to like live her life. And it's only when she's pushed that far, when the cat is threatened, that she's like, okay, time to get out the spell book. I'm going to draw a pentagram. Like, let's go.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's great. And then arguably the darkest of all of them is the third story, because I was shocked, Alex. I don't know about you, when Donald Pleasance just casually drowns a whole like litter of kittens in, I think, the toilet of the bathroom. Like, what the fuck?
I couldn't watch it.
No.
I couldn't watch that part. I had to like look away. I was
brutal.
Like, it's yeah, I mean, Argento tries to do something similar in Inferno, and it's like equally kind of upsetting to me.
Yeah.
But it's again, it's so brutal, and we talked a little bit about the proliferation of cats and how they can become an invasive species, but like. Damn, I'm supposed to root for this guy, or like cats are supposed to be scary and evil. Like, what's the takeaway? Because it's not there for me.
They're having some fun in this story with kind of poking fun at Hollywood too, I suppose, right? I mean, this one is set in Hollywood.
Yes.
We begin with a kind of like Pit and the Pendulum, Roger Corman kind of sequence before we realize that they're filming a scene, right? And again, like just how ridiculously over the top Donald Pleasance is in this sequence as this kind of like stuck up actor, right? I mean, I just feel like they're really really having fun with kind of poking fun at monstrous Hollywood actors in this story,
Completely. And I also really enjoy Samantha Eggers as like the new girlfriend. I thought she was great because I am so used to her with films like The Brood and, where she's more serious, more dramatic. And I thought she was super fucking funny in this. Like, very kind of ditzy and silly, and I think having a lot of fun. And I actually thought her and Pleasance had like a very like good, like strange chemistry together that I was like, I kind of buy all of this. So like that part really worked for me.
Yeah, it's a weird little movie, right? And not a lot of people have seen it. I don't think that many people, at least here in the UK, are even aware of this movie. It was quite hard to even like come by it. How well do you think this movie does kind of hold up watching it in 2024?
I think it's an interesting like curio of because it's kind of outdated when it came out.
Yeah, the film was a flop, right? I think it was a real box office flop as well, yeah.
And if you think again about like the mid-late 70s of what we were already doing in horror at that time, it's like, well, this doesn't really jive with any of that. So it being a box office flop is no surprise to me. I think it is like, it's this kind of curio, this last gasp of, a certain type of horror for a certain type of person. But it's also, again, I'm not quite sure where it lands with being progressive or a bit more looking back. And I think it just tries to straddle the two. to. And I will say it winds up being quite fascinating and really entertaining often. And there are so many scenes with so many cats, and they are so cute.
Yeah,
and I love it.
I absolutely, I agree. It's pretty rough around the edges, but it's quite fun. Like, I was never bored in this movie. Like, I think it's so, all the stories are so ridiculous. All of the kind of performances are so big and broad and stupid that I just kind of really enjoyed it. And adorable cats in every single scene as well. Yeah.
And again, with the cat, like the human cast, I mean, they're not, I never get the sense that they're like pissed off that they're there or they're making fun of it.
No.
It is like they're committing or having fun. And I'm like, yeah, you guys are getting your paycheck. You know what movie you're in. Have a great time.
Absolutely. And it's like you say, that kind of, that school of actors, that generation of actors, Donald Pleasence and Peter Cushing are perfect examples of people who, like, yes, they did a lot of kind of like silly B movies, but they always sort of took their craft seriously, right? No matter how ridiculous the role or the project, you know, you really feel that in all these movies they're in. Yeah.
Because you need to like have some element of gravitas to it that like gives it a bit of weight, that anchors it in something. Otherwise, it's just pure chaos. And I want the mix of chaos and being grounded in something. And I love the tension when those two play together because, again, like that final scene with Peter Cushing, he looks so scared.
Yeah.
He genuinely is embodying true terror. But it's like you got the cutest little tabbies just wanting to like slash his throat. And then occasionally you see a puppet get thrown at him. And you're like, this is the cutest thing in the world.
When you get little like paws from off screen as well, just adorable, absolutely adorable. I love it. But yeah, like it doesn't fit even with that kind of wave of 70s animal attack movies that were popular. And a lot of those, you know, like Stacey talked about a couple of weeks ago, that, you know, those were the movies that starred people like Ray Milland, who's in this film, but also people like Olivia de Havilland and like these like huge actors that were in these kind of like A-list stars in B movies, right? And that was a bit of a thing through the 1970s, particularly in these kind of animal attack movies. So I guess there is a bit of that to this, but also at the same time, it feels like it could have been made decades before those kind of other animal attack movies from Hollywood, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, now comes the part of the episode when we thank our next 30 Kickstarter backers for helping us to create Final Cut, the official Evolution of Horror card game. I've been really enjoying, now that we're in the height of the summer, getting tagged in photos where people have brought their copies of Final Cut on holiday with them. I've got, you know, received photos of people sitting on a poolside bar or sitting at an airport waiting for their flight, and they're sitting there having a little game of Final Cut. Honestly, it brings me so much joy. I really hope everybody is enjoying playing the game. So I'm going to thank our next 30 Kickstarter backers for helping us to make this game a possibility. A big thank you to Callum McLardy, Alicia, Stanley Daniel, Joseph Cordero, Jonathan Bailey, Nina Araya Lorero, Emily Russell, L4Z4, Andrina Emin, Maria Lila, Garvin Brown, Andrew McAllister, Kiwa Iobi, Jim Waller, Hector Garcia Marino, James Hellier, G-Con, Stephen Dovidas, Claire Duncan, Katazina, Michael Lafferty, Scott Tears, John Dangerfield, Scott Cutts, Joseph Stubbersfield, Eric Top, Christian Johnson, Kathleen Joyner, Richard Thornton, and Jason Beck. A huge thank you to all of those people for being our Kickstarter backers. And one more time, if you want to get your hands on Final Cut, the official Evolution of Horror card game, before we sell out, because our numbers are depleting, then head to evolutionofhorror.com/shop. That's evolutionofhorror.com/shop. Okay, let's return to the second half of this week's episode, in which Alex West and I discuss the bonkers Stephen King anthology movie Cat's Eye from 1985.
Experience a series of electrifying adventures as seen through Stephen King's Cat's Eye.
Where's your sense of humor?
Stephen King's Cat's Eye.
Oh boy. Okay, so once again, we have 3 stories. These 3 stories are all connected by the cutest little brown tabby, and I have a real soft spot for brown tabbies. Named General, or he comes to be named General by the end of the film. And he's this little stray cat, and he's wandering through life, and he comes across what are essentially 3 Stephen King stories. So the first one is Quitters, Inc., where a man is trying to quit smoking through a very strange corporation that utilizes really extreme techniques. And then the cat scampers off and runs into some people at a casino where the head of the casino kidnaps another guy who's been having an affair with his wife and forces him to walk along a ledge around this like penthouse apartment outside where he might fall to his death. The cat watches that, then makes a run for it, and then winds up in the final story, which features visions of the little girl that he's been seeing throughout the movie. And this little girl takes him in, begging her parents, and the cat, who she names General at this point, comes to protect her from this evil little troll jester who is trying to steal her soul or essence or life, I don't know, through her breath while she sleeps. And the cat is kicked out a number of times, but always comes back and protects her and saves her in the end, and he is welcomed into the household. So the first 2 stories of this film, Quitters, Inc. and The Ledge, are both from Stephen King's short story collection Night Shift from 1978. And then the final story, which is Cat Eye, which heavily features General, is new for this film. He wrote it as well.
Well, and that makes sense because I feel like that third story does feel kind of different to the first 2, right? Like, you know, for one thing, that's the only one that is actually very cat-centric as well, but also, like, it's a weird mix of stories and tones, isn't it? What do you think of this film?
I mean, it's definitely, so this came out in 1985, so we're at the point, it feels like, in culture when Stephen King is becoming a household name. You know, he's had a number of books under his belt. He's had, you know, box office successes like Carrie, The Shining, even though he didn't like it. Like, he's becoming this master of horror that is widely accepted. So I think this is where you also start to see that kind of, you know, IP trading on the Stephen King name, for better or for worse. And it's so egregious at the beginning of the film where you get to meet General, and General is like running around, but he's running away from Cujo. And then Christine the car almost hits him. And there's a fucking like bumper plate that's like, or then there's a bumper sticker that's like, I'm Christine the car from the other movie. Like, it's so much. And then
there's a character like reading Pet Sematary in bed as well at one point, and everything. It's like, all right, we get it.
We understand. And I also thought it was interesting because, I mean, I know through various fans of Stephen King that a lot of people are really into the 2 first stories, Quitters, Inc. and The Ledge. Like, they have a fair amount of love from Stephen King fandom. So I think that was probably like an easy, you know, let's turn these into a film or part of an anthology and then tack something on. And, you know, cats are a selling point, I guess.
Interesting.
But, I also know, like, Stephen King has, you know, had a lot of pets in his life, has loved a lot of cats. You know, he writes, you know, especially in the book Pet Sematary, he writes quite beautifully and quite fondly about cats. So I imagine there's something there in it for him. But it's a real mishmash of stories and tones, and the last story works the best for me, but you know, it's strange. It's an odd one.
It's so odd. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't like this film as much as The Uncanny. I think it feels a bit all over the place. I liked the first story fine, Quitters, Inc. I liked the third one quite a lot. The second one really fucking dragged for me. The Man on the Ledge one, I could have just lopped that one out altogether. And I know, like you said, there are a lot of Stephen King fans who are a big fan of that particular short story. But I think in this adaptation, it just wasn't effective. I didn't think. I was just like, what is this story doing here in this horror film? It was really strange. Yeah.
I think on paper, it probably sounds like something that would be really interesting to film and to, create dread and anxiety and be very cinematic. It doesn't come together. It's too contrived. Again, I know people who love the short story, and maybe some of them out there are yelling that they love this interpretation of this. And obviously you can love whatever you want. But I also struggled reading that short story years ago. I was just like, it's just kind of boring. I'd just be like, I'm just not going to have the affair anymore. Because again, like, I've never been unfaithful to a partner, but I think the idea of having a full-blown affair, like, it's just so much effort.
Yeah.
And then, you gotta, walk this ledge. Like, no, thank you. I'm out. Like, this is fine.
Yeah.
I'm done. I'm going to bed. I can't.
It's a really interesting one, and I wonder what made them want to package these stories together and then make it kind of cat centric. Like you said, it's just a weird decision, isn't it? I guess somebody at some point just thought, oh, there's a nice through line. We'll just have a cat wandering around New York City that kind of comes across these different stories or whatever.
Yeah, and I think again, there is the iconography of the cat, and there's something very intriguing about that. I mean, Stephen King would also go on to write one of the weirdest movies about cats, which is Sleepwalkers, which is it's incredible, but it's deeply stupid.
Yeah.
It was kind of an odd one, but I think Stephen King has a lineage of cats in his story and his life, and I can see there being something stemming from that. And I think also toying with the idea of the cat being this evil thing in the house, and then, saving the cat's reputation and, honoring it in a different way and showing it as a protector is, pretty subversive for, other stories about cats, being very on the nose about here's this other little creature that's fucking with this little girl, and all this cat is doing is trying to protect her, despite how god-awful that goddamn mother is.
Yeah, awful. Yeah, exactly. And I agree with you. I think, and Stephen King he's really good at doing this kind of thing, right? The kind of subversion of the classic kind of domestic kind of icons, whether it's a father turning on his kids in The Shining, or whether it's a mother in Carrie, or a pet cat or a pet dog like Cujo, animals, children, parent figures, and making them monstrous. Stephen King is really good at that kind of stuff, right? But weirdly, this film doesn't have that. Again, it's interesting. Again, it goes with what we were saying at the beginning about how cats are portrayed in horror films, because really there is no kind of monstrous demonic cat in this film, right? The cats, for the most part, again, are kind of protectors. It's so interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's. Again, that's a major part of Sleepwalkers, that the cats are the heroes of that movie. And I think, there is, even in Pet Sematary, Church kind of becomes corrupted because of the land, and is kind of that, litmus test for the evil that space holds for the family. And I think, this one is, it's subversive to have a cat be the hero.
Yeah.
To have the cat save the day.
Yeah, a cat and a child, I guess. When you look at the poster of it, it's it's cute Drew Barrymore and a cute cat, basically, the kind of make up the kind of marketing of this film, I suppose. What do you think of, and I mentioned already, Louis Teague, who directed this, had already directed Cujo. So again, maybe that's part of also the reason why they were let's make this animal focused and animal centric. But how do you find the direction in this film? Do you think it's effective as a horror film, if that's even what it's trying to be? Again, I think tonally it's quite an interesting, weird mix, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say it's a Stephen King movie more than a horror movie. Again, that kind of cottage industry starting to bubble up. And I think you are right. We'd had this kind of lineage of Cujo and other things that had come before it. So a cat feels like a really natural progression there. It's just it just wasn't scary. The first two stories are about men being fucking idiots, and I was like, then I shall just not be a fucking idiot. And then the third story, which is probably maybe the most successful. I don't know.
Yeah.
And that feels kind of like a Goosebumps story.
Yes.
So there's something very
does.
childlike about it, like very youthful. And that's not to disparage Goosebumps or YA horror. It's again, like, who is your audience for this? I'm not sure. Like, if I was an adult human being who went to see this in 1985, I would have been like,
Yeah,
sure.
exactly.
No.
Because even as part of the Stephen King brand, it's not got the teeth that, you know, Cujo has, The Shining has,
No.
Carrie has, right? It's not as dark or horrific as any of those previous movies that he was kind of known for at this point, right? So, yeah, you're right. It's interesting. It is almost skewing kind of like comedy / YA fantasy or something. It's really, really strange mix. Yeah.
And I think even like Quitters Inc. has, it's so much more satirical than anything else. Of, you know, when like smoking went from being normal to like, oh, this could actually really fuck up your health. And so I think that kind of satire of quitting at any cost and the hand-wringing over it, again, it's kind of odd to watch in 2024 because so few people smoke to that degree. And then again, it's always kind of wild now when you watch a movie and you see people like smoking indoors and you're like, what a time.
Oh my god, it's mad, isn't it? Like in old movies when you see people smoking on planes as well. I'm like, wow, that was
Wild.
Imagine. But yeah, and I suppose the other major kind of touchstone, actually, thinking about it, that we haven't mentioned is Creepshow too in 1982, which was obviously Stephen King wrote. It was directed by George Romero. It was an anthology, and it had that same kind of slightly more cartoony, comic-y, comedy / horror vibe to it. And I think, again, like tonally more successful because I think with Creepshow, it very much knew what it was going for, that kind of like old school comic vibe, which this movie is kind of half doing, you know?
Yes, yeah. And it was so stylized. Like, I'm not the biggest Creepshow fan. I like it, and I like Creepshow 2 as well to a certain degree. But it's so stylized that even if I'm not, you know, loving the fuck out of it, I can still be like, I understand what this movie is. It has style.
Yeah.
It has a total vision for it. And I appreciate that. Whereas this just seems like it's kind of all mashed together and it doesn't kind of coalesce into anything totally meaningful.
So let's talk about that first story, starring James Woods as well, who is always like, he's so good at playing like icky man, isn't he, James Woods? You know, very good at it.
I mean, you portray what you are, I guess, like as an actor. Sometimes that's the easiest place to be because he's a terrible human being.
Right.
But quite a good actor.
Yeah.
Or was, while he was, before he was like a pariah. But yeah. I think with Quitters Inc., you've got this, you know, interesting tension, as I was mentioning, with a satire of the anxiety around smoking, but then also a husband just not telling his wife certain things.
Yes.
And them having to try to come back from like this horrible moment in their lives and moment in their relationship where it seemed like it was all going to fall apart, but they all just kind of, you know, pushed it under the rug. But then you have the final moment where you see the other woman's finger missing or part of it. Yes. And it's kind of like, ooh, what does that mean? Or you know, how much have they actually been able to move past this? Or can you ever move past something like this?
There's something super, again, maybe it's that Stephen Kingness of it, but there is something so 80s about this, right? Like we talked about how the uncanny felt like a throwback. It didn't feel like it was necessarily set in the 70s. It could have been set in the 50s or at any point, really. But this feels so quintessentially like, especially this Quitters Inc. story, this kind of like, I don't know, there's this kind of like corporate kind of yuckiness about it as well, you know, which again, it's all being satirized in a really kind of interesting way, but it's very much kind of a product of its time, I think, as well, isn't it, this particular one?
Yeah, and I think again that kind of like that 80s yuppie consumerism of like, I know I need to do this thing and I wanted to do it fast and easy and I'll just go to this thing and it'll happen and that'll be fine, but not totally understanding the consequences of, you know, you can get it cheap and easy or good and slow, you know?
Yeah. It's quite a creepy, quite horrible concept that he's like, when he puts that cat in that room that gets like electrocuted on the floor, right? Or whatever it is. And he's like, we're going to put your wife in this. Like, it's quite a mean spirited story in a way, right? Which I quite appreciated.
Yeah, and I feel like the film just never got to that level, as you're mentioning. Like, it doesn't have the teeth to actually be like, can we actually just acknowledge how really fucked up this is? Like,
right.
You know, how a relationship gets to that point, and like just a relationship with smoking, and then how it expands to your family, and what does that mean? And just having, you know, you can have such an interesting conversation about all of that. And I just feel like the film isn't interested in that. It wants to get to its set pieces and, you know, let James Woods choose some scenery and then be done and on to the next. Yeah,
I think that's it, right? There's this kind of really interesting idea at the center of this, but I feel like it's just like not quite. They're not almost as interested in that the horror of that stuff as I would like them to be. And then we've talked about it a bit already, but that second story, you know. Again, like for me, it felt like it dragged a bit, which is always not good for like a 15-20 minute story in an anthology film, right? In fact, the only bit I really liked was the bit when the cat has to cross the busy road in Manhattan, because that was actually quite tense, you know?
Yeah, and they're like placing bets on it, and it's like, you kind of, again, like you got, I totally agree with you. You have a sense of like the level of, you know, cavalierness that this group of people has towards life, and how they enjoy toying with it. And it's showing, not telling, but it's super effective. And then you're watching a guy crawl along a ledge for 20 minutes, and it is, to me, not interesting. I'm not fussed by it.
Maybe that could have been done more excitingly at the hands of a better director. I'm not really sure, but yeah, I think like whatever they were going for with that particular story just didn't quite work when it was translated to the screen, I think, you know?
Because it did remind me a bit of the Ted Danson and Leslie Nielsen Creep Show segment.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Which is,
I think
again,
is much more effective.
So much more effective. And again, like there is that kind of meanness to it that I kind of liked, but it's not as effective in that kind of horror way. You're so right. That Leslie Nielsen one is much more effective. Like that's a much more powerful version of that kind of a story, I think.
Yeah. And like tense and like these two men fighting over this woman who you don't really get to understand or know. And the ledge falls like as flat as one of the walls he's pressing himself against.
Exactly that. And then finally we get to this bizarre little outlier story, the little girl and the troll, or whatever the fuck it is, and the cat. Also, why is the cat seeing like visions of Drew Barrymore throughout the film as well, you know, like from the very beginning? Is that just like because she needs its help? She's calling out to him?
You know, I mean, I think we can't underestimate how big Drew Barrymore was in the mid-'80s, and I mean popular for everyone. No, I think I will interpret it maybe as that's like her soul cat, and they talk about like your soul animal in certain, you know, corners of the internet where we really love our pets.
Absolutely.
And you know, we all have that. And, you know, I think that's, you know, there's just a connection between two creatures, whatever mammal or lizard they are, that are destined to find each other. And so I think General was always on a mission to get to her because she needed him. And, that's, you know, who rescued who, Mike?
Well, quite. Absolutely. You're right. They needed each other. They were calling out for each other. And absolutely, from a very cynical perspective, I think you're absolutely right. There were probably let's put Drew Barrymore in the first reel of this movie so people know she's in it.
Yeah, because otherwise people will leave.
Yeah. Which is such a strange thing when she was like, what was she, about 12 max in this movie? Like, it's so funny that she was like the big headlining name. It's kind of fucked up, isn't it, really?
And meanwhile, she's kind of like playing it like she's the Princess Leia hologram in A New Hope. Like,
yes.
Help me, General, you're my only hope. Like, all right.
Yeah. But then, this cat arrives in her home. She obviously falls deeply in love with this cat, wants to keep it, but her mum is so anti having this cat.
Another
right? She
fucking cunt. Like,
honestly, like, what is this mum's deal? She desperately wants to get rid of this cat in any way possible. Basically, it's so weird.
like short of taking it out back with a brick. Like, I don't know what else she could have done.
Yeah. But then there's this other kind of like bizarre story that emerges where you've got this like little man living in the walls of her bedroom who's coming out and sort of fucking things up that the cat has to protect her from, right? And this is not where I saw this story going. It was just really bizarre.
Yeah, and it's like it's our friend Stacey Ponder's favorite subgenre, which is wall people.
Wall people, absolutely, yeah.
When in doubt, is there a wall person?
Yeah.
Always a good question to ask about any place that you're in. And it becomes very odd because you start seeing this troll thing a lot.
Yes.
Like a lot. And I appreciated, like, I love something where you do like, where you change your perspectives and like there's really big furniture and, a regular sized person running around. So it looks really tiny. Like, I like that kind of filmmaking. It feels very fun. So I like had a little bit of fun with that, but I was like, man, I'm watching this little troll thing run around a lot.
A lot. Yeah.
A lot. I did appreciate in the final fight when the cat was like DJing almost. And
yes, there was a lot of Sting and the Police and Every Breath You Take. Yeah. Hilarious. That song was like clearly like licensed for that film, and they played it as many times as possible throughout as well.
Yeah, they took a lot of that troll money, put it towards Sting.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, the troll was a really strange thing, but you're right. Like, I like that visually this segment was more fun and more interesting. And Drew Barrymore's great, right? I mean, like, it's not a hot take to say that she was a really good actress even as a child, right? She's very watchable in this segment.
Yeah, very charming, not annoying. I was constantly like, stop taking this cat away from her. The cat clearly loves her. So it's it's a interesting entry into the cat horror subgenre that is not totally successful, but there's also not a lot like it out there. So it's good to have.
Well, and is there like a little sort of twist at the end when they got rid of the troll and the cat does come and sit on top of her? Is the cat like stealing her breath or soul or something?
No.
Are you sure, Alex? Is there something sinister going on with that cat at the end?
Well, if that's what cats do, then my soul, that's the explanation for my soul being gone for this long. They usually just sleep on me. And I'm happy to have them sleep on me. I think it's a sense of like, this is what we were always told cats do, is like they lie on your chest to steal your breath, but then they actually just lie on your chest for like comfort. And security, and they're so cute.
So cute, and it is such a cute little moment, that kind of like real close-up of just the cat's little face and Drew Barrymore's little face just looking at each other.
Yeah,
adorable.
It's sweet.
Adorable. What a wholesome film. It's like not really what I wanted from my horror film, but
this is the most
lovely little end to that story.
This is the most wholesome episode of Evolution of Horror I've ever been on, yet I managed to say cunt twice, now 3 times, so it's clearly fine.
Yeah. I mean, it is fine, and there are some real cunty people doing some really cunty things in this movie. I think it's just that it's the movie doesn't always necessarily seem that interested in that element of it, which is what's so weird and interesting about it.
The movie doesn't know what it's interested in. Like, it doesn't know what it's trying to do or how it wants to do it, and it's just a bit of a mess with some entertaining moments, and I think it kind of earns its place in a Stephen King legacy by having Quitters Inc. and The Ledge included as part of it. But like, I don't hear people talking about like Drew Barrymore in general versus the troll jester very much.
Well, I don't really hear a lot of people talk about Cat's Eye generally. Like, how do you think this movie holds up in the great kind of pantheon of Stephen King adaptations?
It's low. It's real low. It's just like it's well enough made.
Yeah.
to be okay, but in no way interesting.
Yeah.
Like it's not bad enough to be silly and fun. It's just kind of like, it just kind of plods along.
Yeah.
And again, this is when I feel like Stephen King became like a brand more
Yes.
than a person. And for better or for worse, like he's still done great stuff. There's still been amazing adaptations of some of his work. And as you know, just saying, like he still puts out some work that is good on occasion. But you start to see that kind of split of like the artist, and he can still be an artist, but this brand overtaking it a bit more.
Definitely. They'll probably remake it one day, right? Like Mike Flanagan will do it or something,
They're running out of options, so I'm sure they will at some point.
They're running out. This kind of like new wave of Stephen King re-adaptations has not been great, like the kind of Firestarter, Pet Sematary, at some point we're supposed to be getting another Salem's Lot. That's kind of been delayed indefinitely. Like, they've not been great.
No, but, it's King keeps getting his money, so that's good.
Good for
That's
him.
really nice.
We're all pleased for him.
Well, because my favorite part of any like new film that he's a part of is he always like tweets something that's like, this is the best adaptation of anything that I've ever done. And it's like, okay, Stephen.
I know. It's so funny. I mean, it's very sweet that he's very supportive, although, like you say, he is getting all the money for each of these things. So I suppose,
Yeah, I would also say good things.
But it's so funny that he's so outspoken about how much he hates Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, and yet he will talk about the recent Firestarter adaptation as being like a brilliant adaptation of his work.
Yeah, it's like we go through these cycles where he gets kind of like overexposed and it gets pulled back, and then you get like a Misery, and you're like, oh shit, yes, this is really great and really different and really needed in like film and horror. And so maybe we're due for something really good soon.
Well, there you go. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining me. What a fun, weird pair of films this was to discuss. I loved it. Just branching away from just cats for a moment, what's your kind of favourite horror movie in this subgenre? Like you said, it's a massive, broad subgenre, but do you have any particular favourites?
Ooh, I probably like borders whether you totally include it in the subgenre, but I will say it. Do you remember a film from like the mid-90s called The Relic?
Yes, I do remember The Relic.
Where it's like the monster is brought over from like the Amazon, and it's like a lizard, and it's in a museum, and then they're having a big gala, and the monster gets out.
Oh, it's good shit.
That movie rules.
It's so good, and it absolutely does fit in this subgenre, I would say. And
okay, great.
There is an amazing little like wave of movies we got in the 90s when we got like Deep Rising, The Relic, Anaconda, Deep Blue Sea, like these it kind of like it returned to the 70s wave of A-list stars starring in like big silly disaster movies and animal attack movies, and it was a great time for the subgenre at that point.
Yeah, and I'll shout out another film that kind of features cats, and it's from the early 90s. I think it's 1993, and it's a film called Tomcat, Dangerous Desire. Ooh. And it stars Richard Grieco as a modern dancer who, for various reasons, gets his DNA spliced with a tomcat, and then becomes highly sexual and murderous. Wow. And there are dance sequences. There's like Gregorian like rock music. There is so much weird sex stuff, and it is incredible. And if people can find it out there on the maybe less legal means of the internet, I highly recommend it.
That's so interesting. Well, that's another thing we didn't really mention, not to go down like another diversion, but like the kind of association with cats and kind of sexuality, right? And horniness, like going all the way back to obviously cat people. And there's that other kind of legacy. You think of characters like Catwoman and stuff. I don't know. There's also something that's kind of associated with kind of sex and sexiness, I suppose, that's linked with cats, which is really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, they're very, like, you can go through, like, they're very slinky. They're, quite beautiful. They've got these big bright eyes, and also again, as I was talking about before, their ability to procreate cannot be understated, and it has been so important to their survival. And even we talk a little bit about that in our new Faculty of Horror episode that just came out with Lotta, the Panther Woman from Island of Lost Souls. Yes. Who's heavily featured in the marketing and is like literally credited as the Panther Woman because she's meant to be exoticized and sexualized. And yeah, so you're either, you're the sexy cat woman or the crazy cat lady. Like it flips real fast. We don't know how. I think J.D. Vance tells us, and that's how it goes.
Yeah, exactly. It's like Kamala Harris, these cat women just all, they're either sexy or they're spinsters,
How dare they? Yes. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, Alex, thank you so much. Always such a pleasure to have you here. Just remind people where they can come and find more of your stuff. If they want to pick up their copy of your latest book, where can they come find you?
Yeah, if you're not already listening to Faculty of Horror, that's the podcast I do with Andrea Subasati. You can check us out there. Otherwise, you can come find out more about me at alexandrawest.ca. Website has links to things, or over on the Instagram where I'm at Alex West, followed by some underscores. I post all the links and stuff there. Also, a lot of photos of my cats. So if you want to see photos of Moon and Church, go there. I have highlights just dedicated to them, not for anyone else. If you'd like to look at them, you can. They're just for me, so I can look at them being cute.
Oh my God, they're adorable. I mean, I would recommend everyone follow Alex. I'm not saying, Alex, that I only follow you for your cat content, obviously, but
it's part of it.
I do very much appreciate all the cat content. Absolutely. Amazing. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Mike.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. And one more time, a huge thank you to my brilliant guest, Alex West. It's always such a dream to have Alex on the podcast. Hopefully she will be back again soon. So let us know what you thought of this week's discussion and what you think of these two bonkers movies. I had a lot of fun watching them and discussing them. What did you guys think? Please do get in touch. You can email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on all the socials, of course, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. And if you want to discuss this week's episode with fellow listeners, you can join the discussion group. That's the Evolution of Horror discussion group, which you can find on Facebook. You can also join the Evolution of Horror Discord, where you can discuss the podcast with fellow listeners, and also join weekly watch-alongs where they all watch as a group each movie that we're going to be covering in the series every Sunday night. This podcast is part of the EOH network of podcasts, and if you want to check out some of our other output, head to evolutionofhorror.com/network. You'll find links there to our sister podcast, The Detective and the Log Lady, in which Stacey Ponder and I are watching and discussing every episode of David Lynch and Mark Frost's Twin Peaks. You can find Evolution of Horror wherever you get your podcasts, of course, and if you get a spare moment, I'd be so grateful if you could drop us a little rating and review on your podcast app of choice, as that always really helps us get discovered by new listeners. So, on to next week then. Next week is going to be really fun because we are going back to the ocean for a quadruple bill of very entertaining movies. Next week, I'm going to be joined by Alex Ayling, and we're going to be discussing the Piranha franchise. That is, of course, Piranha from 1978, Piranha 2, The Spawning from 1982, Piranha 3D from 2010, and Piranha 3 Double D from 2012. A mixed bag next week, but it's going to be a very fun discussion. Join us next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.